Have you ever felt like your entire future was balancing on the edge of one decision, one fragile lifeline that could snap at any moment? My name is Charlotte Evans, and for as long as I can remember, I've carried the weight of my family's expectations on my shoulders. But this isn't a story about success that came easy. This is about the night everything I worked for slipped right through my fingers, and how I found the strength to build it all again, one piece at a time. It started on a quiet Saturday, the kind where the world outside feels suspended, hushed by the promise of spring. My apartment was small and cluttered with textbooks, empty coffee mugs, and a hope I kept stoking through endless drafts of my master's thesis. I had spent months surviving on microwave noodles and odd jobs nannying working at the campus library, anything to cover rent and keep the lights on. Every morning I woke up with the same mission: just make it through one more day, one more page, one more shift. If you've ever worked towards something so hard that it became part of you, a dream you guarded even as life tried to tear it away, you'll understand why I put up with exhaustion, why I missed birthdays, weddings, and quiet moments with friends. My laptop wasn't just a machine, it was my lifeline. Every word, every citation, every sleepless night was stored there. I knew I couldn't afford to lose a single file, because starting over wasn't an option. Or so I thought. And yet life rarely waits for us to be ready. My younger brother Ryan stormed into my room that evening, demanding I drop everything to drive him to a party across town. I shook my head gently but firmly, telling him I had to finish my thesis. He rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath about me thinking I was better than everyone, and slammed the door. I remember feeling that old ache, the one you get when you know you're about to be the villain in your own home for simply chasing your goals. What happened next changed everything. A few minutes later, I heard a crash in the living room, a sound so sharp, so final, it carved the air in two. I rushed out and found my laptop in pieces on the hardwood floor. The screen was split down the center, the keyboard broken, years of work shattered at my feet. My brother stood over the wreckage, arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. "Oops," he said. It slipped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. You might expect in a moment like this that someone would step in, offer comfort, or at least outrage. Instead, my mother barely glanced up from her magazine. "It's just a computer, Charlotte," she laughed, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. My father shook his head with a kind of bemused pity. "You kids, and your digital nonsense. Should have printed it out like we used to." The ache in my chest grew deeper, twisting into something sharp and unrecognizable. My family wasn't just indifferent, they seemed amused by my pain. I wanted to scream, to plead for understanding, but the words wouldn't come. Ryan shrugged, tossed me a look that said, "Maybe next time don't act like you're the only one who matters," and walked away. I sat in the silence that followed my whole world, reduced to a pile of broken plastic and dreams. That night I learned that heartbreak doesn't always sound like shouting. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of a door closing, the low hum of a television in another room, and the knowledge that you're on your own. But here's the thing, in the darkest moments, we discover what we're truly made of. As I stared at the shattered remains of my work, grief quickly turned to resolve. I realized that if I was ever going to stand on my own, I had to find the courage to start again, even if I had to do it alone. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just the end of one dream. It was the beginning of a journey that would test everything I believed about family forgiveness and the power of standing up for yourself. And if you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or unworthy in your own home, I hope you'll stay with me. Because the story I'm about to share isn't just about loss. It's about resilience. It's about learning to draw your own boundaries and to honor your worth, even when the people closest to you try to tear it down. So before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Have you ever had to fight for something no one else believed in, but you? Let's dive in together and see what happens when a single act of betrayal sparks a lifetime of change. In the weeks that followed, I became an expert at reading silence. If you've ever lived in a house where the loudest things are the words left unsaid, you'll know what I mean. My parents never once mentioned the broken laptop. No one offered to help or even to ask how I was holding up. Instead, the air seemed to thicken with small gestures, averted eyes, quick changes of subject, and the quiet praise they still showered on my brother Ryan. He'd sleep late, skip chores, and still be met with a proud smile or a gentle nudge about his potential. The truth is, favoritism in families isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's as subtle as who gets the last piece of pie at dinner, or whose mistakes are quietly forgiven, while yours are held up for inspection. In my home, Ryan was the golden child, and I became the invisible one. At first I told myself it was just my imagination, but every day seemed to prove otherwise. I saw it in the way my mother packed his lunch, but left me to fend for myself in the way my father bragged about his little league trophies, long after they'd collected dust in the garage. I started to wonder if I was overreacting, if maybe I expected too much. But then I'd remember stories I'd heard from friends, stories of siblings who could do no wrong, of parents who made excuses for every failing. I thought of Emily, my classmate in college, who spent years picking up after her brother's messes, only to hear her parents complain that she wasn't supportive enough. I realized this wasn't just my story. It was a pattern that played out in households everywhere, quietly teaching some of us to disappear so others could shine. Being the overlooked child shapes you in ways that aren't always visible. You learn to shrink yourself to apologize before you've even done anything wrong. You start to believe that love must be earned, and that even when you give your all, it might never be enough. There were nights I replayed every moment, wondering if I could have changed something, been more agreeable, less ambitious, easier to love. But no amount of self-blame could change the simple fact that sometimes parents love unequally, and it's not your fault. If you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. Studies show that parental favoritism is more common than most of us realize, affecting self-esteem, mental health, and the relationships we carry into adulthood. In American families, the golden child dynamic can leave deep wounds not just for the one overlooked, but for the favored child as well. Ryan grew up believing rules didn't apply to him and that he was always entitled to a second chance, no matter the cost to others. Looking back, I wish I'd understood that the way people treat you often has more to do with their own blind spots than with your worth. The real lesson is this: love in its truest form is never a competition. It's not measured by who gets the most praise or the biggest share. The most important thing you can do is to hold on to your own value, even when others try to define it for you. That quiet strength is what carried me forward when everything else fell away. Still, the ache of being overlooked didn't go away overnight. It lingered, shaping my choices and the way I saw myself. But in that silence, I also found something else, a stubborn ember of hope, a voice whispering that I deserved better. And as the days turned into weeks, that ember slowly grew brighter, setting the stage for the next chapter in my life. Little did I know the struggle for recognition and respect would become the fuel for my greatest act of resilience yet. Picking up the pieces was never just about finding a way to finish my thesis, it was about finding a way back to myself. In the aftermath of my laptop's destruction, I felt stripped bare, as if all the late nights, the sacrifices, and the hope I'd poured into my work had been swept away. But survival has a way of nudging us forward. The very next morning, I borrowed a backpack, filled it with library snacks and notepads, and caught the earliest bus to campus. My plan was simple: use any computer I could find, save everything twice, and build again from memory. At first, the task felt impossible. I'd lost all my draft chapters, the annotated articles, the careful notes from research trips. The campus library was noisy during the day, so I started working overnight, nestled between shelves sustained by coffee and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. There were times when I'd forget what I'd already written or lose a new draft because the network crashed. More than once I broke down and cried, convinced the universe was conspiring against me. But each setback became a lesson in endurance, a reminder that resilience isn't born out of easy victories. I wasn't alone in my struggle, though it often felt that way. Sometimes I'd see other students sleeping at their desks, textbooks as makeshift pillows, the same look of exhaustion in their eyes. I remembered stories from classmates who lost everything to a stolen backpack or a server crash that erased months of work. My friend Javier once had to rewrite his entire thesis after his apartment flooded. He said the second version was better, stronger, forged in fire. That thought stuck with me during my lowest moments. Maybe what I built this time could be even stronger than before. The truth is, most of us will face moments when our plans fall apart, sometimes through no fault of our own. It's easy to feel defeated, to believe that what's lost can never be recovered. But hardship, as I learned in those long nights, often reveals a strength we didn't know we had. Each page I reconstructed, each resource I tracked down again, became proof that my effort mattered, even if nobody at home seemed to notice. The work was slow, and progress was measured in tiny victories. A paragraph found in an old email, a research article saved to a flash drive by chance. What got me through wasn't just grit, it was hope and a growing sense that I could depend on myself even when others let me down. The lesson I carried from those weeks was simple but powerful: life may take things from you, but it can't take away your will to begin again. I started to see the library not as a place of exile, but as a sanctuary where I could chart my own course, free from the shadows of favoritism and expectation. With every passing day, the story I was writing on the page and in my heart grew a little clearer. Little did I realize that this stubborn determination would become the spark for something bigger. The skills I honed rebuilding my thesis, problem-solving resourcefulness, the courage to ask for help, would soon be put to the test in ways I never could have predicted. And as I prepared for another sleepless night, I found myself not just recovering lost work, but reclaiming the parts of myself that had been buried under years of neglect. The next challenge was waiting just around the corner, and this time I was ready to meet it head-on. As I rebuilt my academic life, another realization took root. Sometimes, to protect your future, you have to confront uncomfortable truths in the present. My family had always been skilled at overlooking Ryan's missteps, brushing off his antics as boys will be boys. But after the laptop incident, I noticed patterns I couldn't ignore. Ryan wasn't just careless, he was reckless, and often shielded from consequences by our parents' blind loyalty. It wasn't just my computer he'd destroyed. There were stories of broken windows, missing cash, mysterious credit card charges, all quietly swept under the rug. At first, I felt guilty for noticing. I'd been raised to mind my own business, to value peace over honesty, and to forgive quickly. But the more I tried to push my doubts aside, the clearer it became. Protecting Ryan had become a family reflex, even when it meant sacrificing fairness. One evening, as I scanned our bank statement for my portion of the utilities, I recognized charges that didn't add up: online purchases, liquor store receipts, payments for things I'd never bought. My mother would shrug, insisting it must be a mistake, while my father simply rolled his eyes. But I knew better. It's a strange thing realizing you can no longer trust the people closest to you to do what's right. That's when I started quietly collecting evidence: receipts, screenshots, copies of emails, anything that painted a fuller picture of Ryan's behavior. It wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation. If my family wouldn't protect me, I had to learn how to protect myself. I read stories online about people in similar situations, siblings who covered for a brother or sister, only to find themselves tangled in trouble later. Each account made me more determined to be vigilant, not just forgiving. I was surprised by how much strength it took to document the truth. Every piece of evidence was a reminder that the world I'd grown up in wasn't as safe as I'd believed. But it also empowered me. I started to realize that justice doesn't happen by accident. It requires action and sometimes uncomfortable honesty. This was especially true in American families like mine, where loyalty is often confused with silence and love with enabling. I learned that setting boundaries isn't an act of betrayal. It's a necessary step in breaking cycles that harm everyone involved. One lesson became clear: real love means holding others accountable, even when it's hard. By quietly gathering the facts, I wasn't just preparing to defend myself, I was setting a standard for what I would and would not accept in my life. It's something many of us avoid, afraid of rocking the boat. But as I watched the evidence pile up, my fear was slowly replaced by clarity. I was no longer content to be a silent bystander in my own story. What I didn't know then was how soon all this preparation would matter. My growing resolve and my collection of receipts would soon collide with Ryan's next act of carelessness, forcing our family's secrets out into the open. As I pressed save on yet another folder of screenshots, I felt a mixture of dread and readiness. The next challenge wasn't just about recovering lost work. It was about finally speaking the truth no matter who tried to silence me. I didn't have to wait long before Ryan gave me another reason to question everything. One afternoon, as I sat hunched over a library computer, my phone buzzed with an email from the editor of a small local magazine. She thanked me for my recent article submission and asked for a few edits before publication. Confused, I opened the attachment and felt my heart sink. It was an essay I'd never written, copied almost word for word from an obscure online blog. The byline, my name. I realized with a rush of dread that Ryan had not only plagiarized, but had used my identity to do it. At first I froze, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It was surreal, another line crossed another betrayal. I remembered the stories I'd read about siblings forging signatures or borrowing money in a family member's name, convinced no one would ever find out. I wondered if Ryan even thought twice, or if he assumed as always that I would clean up the mess. I felt a familiar wave of exhaustion and anger, but this time I also felt a new sense of resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation, I was fighting for my right to be seen as more than someone's scapegoat. I took a breath, gathered the screenshots, and replied to the editor explaining the situation. She responded with sympathy and said she'd flagged Ryan's submission. That small act of self-advocacy was terrifying, but also deeply liberating. For years I'd let things slide to keep the peace, swallowing my pain for the sake of family harmony. But as I pressed send on that email, I realized I was finally drawing a line. It didn't make the ache disappear, but it did make me feel a little less helpless, a little more like the author of my own story. Stories like mine aren't as rare as you might think. In fact, identity theft and academic dishonesty within families are reported every year, especially among siblings who grew up with blurred boundaries and unequal expectations. I read about a woman named Karen who spent years untangling her finances after her brother racked up debt in her name. She said the hardest part wasn't the paperwork, it was accepting that someone she loved could betray her trust so casually. For Karen and for me, the real healing began when we stopped protecting those who refused to respect us. That's the lesson I want to share. Loyalty is important, but it should never come at the cost of your self-respect. It's okay to speak up even when it feels uncomfortable. The people who truly love you will want to make things right, not sweep them under the rug. Every time you choose honesty over silence, you take back a piece of your power. And the more you practice setting boundaries, the easier it becomes to trust yourself, even when others try to shake your confidence. By standing up for myself, I also discovered a new kind of courage, one that would serve me well when even bigger storms arrived. What I didn't realize then was that Ryan's actions had set in motion a chain of events no one could ignore, not even my parents. As I walked home that night, the air felt crisper, clearer, and for the first time in a long time, I sensed that change was coming. And this time, I would be ready. When I finally confronted Ryan about the article, his reaction was as careless as I'd feared. He just shrugged and smirked, as if consequences had never truly touched him. "No one's going to believe you anyway. You're the dramatic one, remember," he taunted. His words stung, but they didn't paralyze me the way they once might have. Instead, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me, a clarity born from months of hardship and silence. This wasn't just about a stolen essay. It was about a lifetime of excuses, a pattern of harm that had gone unchecked for too long. It wasn't easy to take the next steps, but I knew what I had to do. I gathered every piece of evidence. I had screenshots of Ryan's messages, copies of emails, and receipts from his misused purchases. I prepared a timeline of events and reached out to the University Ethics Committee, the magazine's editorial staff, and even the family bank where Ryan had opened an account in my name. My hands shook with each email I sent, but the fear was slowly replaced by a sense of purpose. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was seeking real accountability. Reactions from my family were swift and brutal. My mother begged me to drop everything, insisting family comes first. My father said these problems should be solved privately, that I was making a spectacle, but I held my ground. I explained calmly that real families don't ask you to stay silent about harm, and that love without boundaries only leads to more pain. It reminded me of stories I'd read, like one about a young woman, Leah, whose parents pressured her for years to hide her brother's fraud. Only when she refused did their family finally start to heal, though the process was messy and painful. This experience taught me that the hardest part of drawing boundaries isn't facing outsiders, it's standing up to those you love. It's normal, especially in American culture, to hear phrases like, "Don't air your dirty laundry," or "keep family matters in the family." But secrets only protect those who cause harm, not those who suffer it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is shine a light on the truth, even if it means losing the illusion of harmony. The peace I found in honesty was worth far more than any temporary calm that silence had brought me. As the investigation moved forward, the pressure at home became almost unbearable. Ryan sulked, my parents grew cold, and family dinners felt like walking a tightrope. Still, I stood firm, reminding myself of everything I'd survived. The process was slow meetings with school officials, lawyers, even uncomfortable phone calls with the bank. But I learned to rely on my own voice. With every boundary I set, I became less afraid of disappointing people who had already disappointed me. Little by little, the truth couldn't be hidden any longer. The weight of secrecy began to lift, replaced by a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. I couldn't rewrite the past, but I could choose honesty moving forward. The journey was far from over, but as the days unfolded, I realized I was finally reclaiming my own story, one hard-won truth at a time. As the days passed and the investigations deepened, the emotional distance between me and my family grew more pronounced. Home no longer felt like a place of comfort. It had become a stage for tense silence and pointed glances. My parents, who once greeted me with casual warmth, now offered little more than polite nods or clipped responses at the dinner table. Ryan avoided me altogether, spending long hours locked away or out with friends, as if the weight of accountability was too much to bear. I learned to navigate these silences, clinging to the small victories that signaled my growing independence. During this period, I found unexpected comfort in my friendships. When I finally shared the truth with my closest friend Marissa, she listened without judgment and offered practical help. Late-night phone calls, advice on legal paperwork, even a home-cooked meal when the days felt especially heavy. Her kindness reminded me that not all families are defined by blood. Many Americans, I discovered, rely on their chosen family friends, mentors, colleagues when their biological families fall short. I read about a man named David who built a circle of friends after his own parents refused to accept his choices. His support system became his lifeline, helping him heal and thrive. Small moments of care made all the difference. Marissa would leave me little notes of encouragement or invite me for coffee on the toughest days. My thesis advisor, Dr. Parker, showed patience and understanding, allowing me extra time to finish assignments when the legal process overwhelmed me. With their support, I found the strength to keep going even when it felt like the world was against me. I realized that accepting help isn't a weakness, it's a source of resilience. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out and let others walk beside you when your own strength is running low. I also started to see how essential it is to separate your sense of worth from the approval of others. It's easy to measure yourself by how your family treats you, but true value comes from within. I began practicing small acts of self-kindness, taking walks by the river after long meetings, journaling about my feelings, and reminding myself that survival is an accomplishment in itself. These rituals, though simple, became a gentle rebellion against the narrative I'd been handed. I wasn't just the dramatic one, I was strong, resourceful, and deserving of respect. Looking back, I see that these were the seeds of real healing. I learned that moving forward sometimes means letting go of old expectations, releasing the hope that people will change if you just try hard enough. True growth often comes when we choose to honor our boundaries, even if it means stepping into the unknown. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time I felt a sense of quiet pride in how far I'd come. With each new day, I moved a little closer to building a life that reflected my own values, not just the wishes of my family. That growing confidence would be tested soon as the fallout from Ryan's actions reached a breaking point. The months of hard-won independence and new support would become the foundation for my next steps toward both justice and a new beginning. When the day of the official hearing finally arrived, I felt both relief and dread. My evidence screenshots, bank statements, correspondence with the university, and the magazine was neatly organized in a folder, but my heart raced as I entered the room. Across from me sat Ryan, arms folded, avoiding my eyes, and my parents beside him, stiff with anxiety. The process was formal but fair. Everyone had a chance to speak, and the facts could no longer be swept aside. As each piece of proof was laid out, I saw the reality settle over my family like a shadow. No one could deny what had happened any longer. The board's decision was swift. Ryan was ordered to make full restitution for the financial losses. His university record was suspended pending review, and the family bank account he'd misused was frozen. My parents tried to bargain, offering to settle things privately and urging me to let go for the family's sake. Their pleas stung, but I kept my voice steady. I explained that true loyalty doesn't mean hiding harm. It means taking responsibility and making things right. I thought of other stories I'd read of siblings who finally stood up for themselves after years of silence, discovering that justice can be healing, even if it's bittersweet. In the aftermath, home felt emptier than ever. My parents' disappointment was palpable, but it no longer had the power to crush me. I focused on rebuilding, redirecting my energy into finishing my thesis, and looking for opportunities beyond the walls of our strained house. It was a time of quiet reflection, and as I applied for jobs and scholarships, I realized how much I'd grown. I wasn't the same frightened girl who had first lost her work. I was stronger, more self-aware, and more compassionate toward myself. During this time, I also learned the importance of forgiveness, not for those who had hurt me, but for myself. I forgave the moments when I hesitated, when I doubted, when I wished things could be different. It's a lesson so many of us need: forgiving yourself for simply surviving, for not being perfect, for putting your needs first. I read about another young woman, Sarah, who had to leave her family after exposing her brother's financial crimes. She built a life on her own terms, finding peace not in winning the battle, but in letting go of the guilt that never truly belonged to her. Gradually, a new sense of freedom took hold. I moved into a small studio apartment in a different city filled with sunlight and possibilities. My world expanded: new friends, a supportive work environment, mentors who encouraged my growth. The old pain didn't vanish overnight, but each day I spent building this life made the past feel less heavy. I realized that healing isn't a destination, it's an ongoing process, made up of everyday choices to keep moving forward. That resilience, once just a spark, now glowed inside me. I was ready for the next chapter, open to the hope that comes from rebuilding with intention. And as I unpacked my books in my new apartment, I felt for the first time in years truly at home, not because of who was there, but because I finally belonged to myself. What I didn't know then was that my journey was about to come full circle in ways I never could have predicted. Life has a way of surprising you just when you think you've settled into a new normal. Months after moving away and rebuilding my sense of self, I received an email from my former thesis advisor. My research had been nominated for a national award, and I was invited to present at a conference in Chicago. For a moment, I just sat there in stunned silence, letting the good news wash over me. It was proof that hard work, no matter how hard one, could still be recognized and valued. I bought a secondhand blazer, packed my slides, and traveled north, a mix of nerves and pride swirling in my chest. Standing in front of that audience, professors, students, experts from all over the country, I felt a nervous energy, but also a sense of belonging I'd never felt at home. The applause at the end wasn't just for my research. It was for every late night, every moment I doubted myself, every time I'd chosen to keep going. I realized that sometimes the recognition we crave doesn't come from family. It comes from the wider world, from the people who see our worth without the weight of old expectations. I met new colleagues, shared stories, and felt for the first time truly respected. Returning home from Chicago, I was greeted by an unexpected twist. The nonprofit think tank where I'd started working had just acquired a historic property in my hometown. Ironically, the same estate where my family used to host reunions. When the annual request came in from my parents to book the venue, it was my name on the approval form. My heart pounded as I read their email, asking for special consideration and hoping to put the past behind us. This was a moment I could never have imagined a year earlier, when I felt powerless and invisible. I thought long and hard about what to do. In the end, I asked our team to uphold our standard booking policy: clients with unresolved disputes or a history of abuse would be declined. The message was delivered professionally, with no trace of personal bitterness. It was not about revenge, but about maintaining healthy boundaries, the very thing I'd learned to value through all my struggles. I'd read about others in similar situations, like James, who inherited his childhood home after years of being pushed aside. He chose to rent it to families in need, not out of spite, but as a way to build something positive from pain. This experience taught me that real empowerment isn't about getting even, it's about living in alignment with your values. The satisfaction I felt wasn't in denying my family access, but in seeing how far I'd come. I didn't need validation from the people who had hurt me. I'd created my own path surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was. That sense of belonging built on self-respect and integrity was more rewarding than any hollow reconciliation. As I closed the email and turned off my computer, I glanced around my apartment, my own space built on hard lessons and small victories. The journey was nearly complete, but one thing remained: sharing what I'd learned so others could find hope in their own stories of struggle and renewal. Looking back on everything that happened, I see now how each struggle, each small act of courage shaped the person I am today. From that first moment of heartbreak, when my world collapsed with the sound of a broken laptop, to the long, lonely nights spent piecing my future back together, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. It wasn't just about proving a point or winning a battle. It was about learning to trust myself and finding the quiet confidence to start again, no matter how many times life tried to knock me down. Along the way, I learned that family isn't always defined by blood or by old traditions. Sometimes it's the friends who stay up late listening to your worries, or the mentors who see your potential when you can't see it yourself. I found hope in unexpected places: a smile from a colleague, a message from someone who read my story and felt less alone. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement became a stepping stone toward healing. I realized that belonging isn't about fitting in with people who refuse to understand you, but about building a life where you're valued for who you truly are. The hardest lesson, and maybe the most important, was learning to let go of guilt and forgive myself for the things I couldn't control. I stopped trying to win over people who never intended to see me. Instead, I poured my energy into the work and relationships that lifted me up. If you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or betrayed by the people closest to you, know this. You have the right to draw boundaries, to start over, and to chase your own happiness without apology. Your story matters, and so does your peace. Every chapter of my journey taught me something new. I learned resilience through hardship, compassion through loneliness, and joy through hard-won independence. The recognition I once longed for came not from those who hurt me, but from those who appreciated my true self. That's the greatest victory of all: the quiet, steady realization that you are enough just as you are. No act of betrayal, no dismissive word can take away your worth. Your light will always shine, even if some choose not to see it. If my story resonates with you, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on your own journey. What strengths have you discovered in adversity? Who has shown up for you in unexpected ways? And most importantly, how will you write the next chapter of your life? If you found hope or comfort here, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a community where no one has to rebuild alone, where every voice is heard and every story matters. Thank you for being part of mine.